Good morning, everyone. I think good afternoon to some of my colleagues in the Middle East and India. My name is Melanie Ancheta. Thank you for taking the time once again to join us for another live webcast with Testhouse. Our focus for today's webinar is on the test features of Visual Studio 2010. My colleague Richard will do an overview of it. Although Visual Studio 2010 is fairly new to the business, to the software testing business, we have delivered numerous engagements and projects on a number of key areas within testing, including performance testing, functional and automated testing, with clients that includes the BBC, EasyJet, Play.com, Zurich Financials, and BMI. Just to give you a quick idea, we've recently produced a case study with BMI using the Visual Studio 2010's test automation functionality, which is the coded UI test, where basically the client saved hundreds of testing days and eventually increased their online bookings with the services that we've delivered for them. More information on the case study and usually on all the Visual Studio 2010 information and all the Visual Studio information that you need, please log on to our microsite. We have a new microsite that we've specifically produced for Visual Studio 2010 and Microsoft. The website is www.ch-ms.com. I will repeat that towards the end of the presentation. Basically, for those new to Testhouse webinars, we normally take questions at the end of the presentation. So if you can please use your Q&A pod, which is on your screen at the moment, and if you have any questions for Richard later, please do so. Basically, our speaker for today is my colleague Richard Lee. He is one of our senior Visual Studio consultants. He's been with us for a long, long time. I'll briefly run through the agenda, and then I'll pass you over to Richard. Our agenda for today is on basically just the Visual Studio 2010. Just a brief introduction on the application life cycle management, its testing capabilities, and more. Richard will talk to you about agile development, Scrum methodology within Visual Studio 2010. And then we go to introducing Test Manager 2010. It's the test management functionality of Visual Studio. Richard will do a quick demo on the test case management, a brief demo on running and recording a manual test on Visual Studio. Then we go through introduction to Lab Manager. Richard will introduce the Lab Center for you. And then we go through another demo on the lab management. That would be a couple of minutes demo from Richard as well. Then we go to dashboard, and last but not the least, the Q&A session. So without further delay, I will now pass you over to my colleague Richard, who will start the presentation. Richard?
Okay, thank you, Mel. Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well. So going through the agenda, we're going to start from the Visual Studio 2010 test tool. So as Mel said, in this webinar, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of the Microsoft Visual Studio team system and the components that make up the system, before focusing on the testing aspects and in particular the new features around the 2010 release. Typically, with all software development projects, there are frequent issues and barriers that prevent proper investigation between testing, development and businesses, and this impedes the delivery of the software. So Microsoft has taken these issues into consideration and have created the Visual Studio 2010 that facilitates in bringing testing and development closer, removing the boundaries and duplication of effort that's so frequently experienced in software project development. As we only have a short time, I won't be able to delve into the software in any depth, and I'm only planning to focus on the newest features that make up the Microsoft Test Manager. But you're welcome to ask any questions at the end or send me an email about some of the functionality that you're interested in that I may cover or may not even cover, for example, the web-based testing. We'll begin by discussing the team system, and this will help us understand how the new testing tools and more specifically the role of the tester will sit in the team system. I also plan to give two brief demonstrations to help break up all the theory that we'll be going through. and I want to show you how you can record a manual test to relieve some of the tedium felt in manual testing, and then I'll go to show how to create an environment using Lab Manager. So I have to assume, without knowing who is on the call, that some people have no knowledge of the Microsoft Visual Studio Team system, which is why I'll be going over some of the fundamentals to help position how all the tools will fit together. So I also want to go very briefly over the Agile Scrum methodology, which is pertinent towards the end of the demo with regard to the dashboard and the reports available. So moving on to the application lifecycle management, let's take a quick look at the overall software development cycle. So within the typical life cycle, from the left moving to the right, business analysts will begin with what the system is and how it will be used, and they'll start to come up with requirements and user stories, what the functionality is, and any interactions users will have with the software. Business analysts will also create non-functional requirements, for example, how many concurrent users the software will have to support, and what the response time will be of the particular software. This moves on to the project manager, who will take those user stories or requirements and then break them down into development tasks. The dev team will then start to work on that, creating code, managing version control, and deploying automated builds, which then passed on to the testers, who will look at the code, run some tests, find some bugs, and submit this back to the dev team to work on. So we also find that the business will have a look at the preview at some point and decide that a few changes will be made. So some change requests will start to come in. Some things will change priority on being delivered at a certain point within the development lifecycle. So as we can see that different tools are used by different people to create different parts of the software. So we can find that things can be spread out amongst a variety of things and can make tracking difficult. So how is it that we tackle this issue? So basically, we all know where we're going here. We put all these different artifacts into one centralized location, which is the Team Foundation Server 2010. Everything that we do in the project, all those flows of information and artifacts are stored in one central repository, and the different people within the team are able to access that information from a tool that they are used to using. So the devs will use Visual Studio 2010, testers will use test management, project managers will access dashboards and reports. So moving closer, looking at TFS in greater detail, it's broadly split into two separate areas. The server to store the information that I've just spoken about, and then depending on your role in the project, the client. So the main client for devs is the Visual Studio, and in this version of Visual Studio, Microsoft has simplified the different versions available. There's the Professional, the Premium, and the Ultimate. And the tester version is Test Manager. So the advantages of using TFS is that we can store all the info, all the artifacts, and drive development progress right through from requirements to test to release, and help support the type of project methodology that we are using, from Agile through to something more traditional like waterfall process. And so PMs can track all their requirements from TFS, and test case management in this version is a lot more functional than it was in previous releases. Moving on to the Agile Development Scrum methodology. I want to talk about this briefly as it affects the dashboards and reports that we'll talk about at the end there. So the Agile testing methodology is an approach to software development projects in which functionality is released in smaller cycles or iterations or sprints. This functionality is based on features that have been broken down into sections small enough to be developed and tested within an iteration. So the advantage of using Agile development is that changes to the project can be made dynamically. Incremental releases verify that features are released and signed off for production and fit within the overall scope of the product. Scrum is a framework for the Agile software development and enables the creations of teams that are able to organize themselves and commit to delivery in a timely manner. So on this PowerPoint we can see that there's a process here, there's separate phases. So we start off at the top there with the kick-off meeting. The goal of this meeting is to get everybody on the team together and review the product backlog that needs to be delivered. We move on to the elaboration, which is a list of work that needs to be done for that particular sprint. So while the team is collectively creating the sprint backlog, stories need to be broken down into either sub-stories or smaller tasks. And during this collective team exercise,